Top 10 decks for the end of May 2023. I just wanted to thank everyone for came out last month and liked my top 10 deck video. Is my most liked video. I just wanted to say thank you. A lot of the conversation today is going to be about High Evolutionary and how High Evolutionary is everywhere and the decks are adapting. And we're also seeing Galactus going up because largely High Evolutionary decks don't have strong counterplay. Well, one of them does. And we'll talk about why that's a good thing. And then towards the end of the video, we're going to talk about the 4 decks that I personally would avoid playing. These are decks that are seeing high play rates, but are oftentimes have inconsistent results, negative win rates, negative cube rates, yet they are being played a lot. So let's get into the list. And this is in a particular order in general. It's not in an exact order, but this is mostly just based off of my opinion. And my top pick for the week right now is still Sarah Control, with making a modification to the deck build and adding Luke Cage. This is a thing. Sarah Control got a lot better with Kitty Pryde. It runs the Nova Killmonger package, which Kitty doesn't care about. On the final turn, you can play Killmonger before you play your super ramped up Kitty. And there's so much synergy in this deck for Kitty Pryde, whether that is Angela or Bishop. She gets out of control. Optimally, you want to snap on turn 5 after you play Sarah. If you don't want to play Luke Cage, and the reason why Luke Cage is here is just because of High Evolutionary. Traditionally, the build would have Scarlet Witch. Now, let's talk about High Evolutionary decks. And we're going to talk about 3 different ones. And the good High Evolutionary decks are kind of branching into 3 specific archetypes. Ones that run Storm, ones that run Wave and let's say Debris, and other ones that run Lockjaw. My personal favorite are going to be the ones that run Storm. There's a lot of variations of this, but the idea is that you play some low-cost cards, whether that is Sunspot or Nebula or Misty early. Then you play Storm, and then you follow up that lane, let's say, with Cyclops. And then on turn 5, you're playing Spider-Man, which is amazing because he costs 4, and you play Spider-Man on 5, and then typically on that lane, on the last turn, you play something big like Doom or a 20-something powered Hulk. This is my personal favorite. There's a couple versions of the Storm Control / Troll High Evolutionary archetype, but this style of High Evolutionary is my personal favorite, and I'm also seeing the best results with it as well. This is a more control version that runs Wave and Debris. As I was saying earlier, High Evolutionary doesn't have a lot of counterplay to Galactus. Debris kind of does. I mean, sometimes, right? I mean, it's hard to counter Galactus. I get it. But the idea of this deck is also that it runs Wave, which is problematic for bounce decks and the Sarah Control deck that I mentioned first, right? You play Wave on turn 5, which is a beautiful thing because you're spending 3, so you're soaking up 2 power into Sunspot. Misty Knight will proc and give you another point of power. Cyclops will zap away 2 more power, and then the Hulk will continue to grow by another 2. The same is going to be true on turn 6 because everything is going to cost 4. So this is my second favorite. Now, this is my personal favorite to play. I enjoy the play style of this High Evolutionary deck over the Storm Spider-Man style, and this has reasonable counterplay to other decks. Lastly is Lockjaw, and this deck is being played a lot, and it seems to be a little bit too inconsistent and random for my liking, but other people are having good results with this deck, so I had to mention it for sure. Lockjaw with High Evolutionary taking advantage of Wasp and Hulk which are easily the two best cards with High Evolutionary. Like, I suspect going forward, there will be many decks that just play High Evolutionary, Wasp, and Hulk and drop them into a deck. Because Hulk gets out of control very easily, and Wasp, you know, provided that there's two other cards in the lane, is basically a 0-3. Can't go wrong with the 0-3. Can't go wrong with the Hulk at 20 something power. I've seen it like 22 sometimes, but it's very often like 16, 18, 20, right? Very high. And then of course, High Evolutionary is just a dead card. Now, Galactus. Now, I do think there's going to be some modification to Galactus decks. The developers have signaled that they're going to do something to the Galactus archetype. I personally think it's going to be something surrounding the Doc Ock card, or they might even do something to Spider-Man. I don't know, but just please understand the developers are watching the Galactus archetype very closely, and I'm expecting some sort of change either to Galactus or an adjacent card like Doc Ock or Spider-Man. It's also worth noting that there was a Galactus deck that won a tournament. So yes, Galactus is very strong. Stature, huge nerfs to this deck. Enchantress was nerfed. Rockslide was nerfed. Stature was nerfed. Black Bolt was nerfed. The changes to Wave were indirect nerfs to Miles Morales, Spider-Man, and Stature. And yet, this deck is very good. Now, this deck is not being played a lot at all, which is to be expected when nerfs come in. The nerfs this week to Stature and Black Bolt has scared a lot of people away from playing this deck, but the results for this deck are still very good, and I suspect that this deck is still playable and still will get very good results. But these nerfs do matter, absolutely. Discard. Oh my God, I love discard. Now, I personally prefer the builds of discard that don't run Swordmaster and Hellcow, and they more run like Storm and Sunspot. But to each their own. This is a very popular build, and it still racks up cubes. There's nothing better than playing MODOK on turn 5 when you have Dracula on the board, Morbius on the board, Morbius going through the roof, Swarms coming back to your hand, drawing into Chavez in the last turn while you had Apocalypse discarded on turn 5. You're having a monster Apocalypse. You play Chavez and all the Swarms, and then Apocalypse goes into Dracula, 16 power, then giving 2 more. It's amazing. It is a very good, consistent archetype. I do recommend discard. I still think it's amazing. Bounce is still very good. Now, there is a skill cap to playing this deck. Like, it takes some getting used to play. The buff to Collector has proved to be meaningful. Bast is one of my favorite cards. Deck largely revolves around Bast. The synergy with Bast and like Mysterio is amazing, because Mysterio goes from being a 4/0/0 to a 3/3/3, and then the synergy with Mysterio with like Bishop is amazing. Best combo in this deck for me, though, by far, is picking up Kitty Pryde with Beast, so that Kitty Pryde then costs 0, continuously dropping it every turn on your Angela lane, and having Bishop go up. Amazing deck. I love this deck. It's a fun deck to play. Again, high skill cap. I feel like there's a pretty steep learning curve to this deck, because you have to worry about hand size, and absolutely it can get ruined by Killmonger or Wave and the likes, but it's still a very good deck. Lastly, making my list is Sarah Surfer. I just also want to acknowledge that some people are now running, let's say, instead of Goose, they're running Luke Cage, just because of High Evolutionary being everywhere. There's also a version of this deck that runs a Shadow King, but largely this is the most popular Sarah Surfer deck. It is still very consistent and very good, and I do recommend it. Now, the next 4 decks are decks that I see people playing a lot, and they have oftentimes negative cube rates and negative win rates. So these are decks that are popular, but are not really winning. And so these are the 4 decks that I'm going to be avoiding for this week. The first one is a toxic deck. This is Hazmat, Viper, Sentry. Try to clutter up your opponents. I know this deck can win. I've played it, but it looks like it is not a consistent deck. And oftentimes this deck just has a negative cube rate and a negative win rate. High evolutionary builds with Thanos seem to be significantly worse than just the traditional high evolutionary build or the ones that run Storm. So this is a deck that I'm personally going to be avoiding. It doesn't seem to be working the way that it should. It's not as consistent as those other builds. This also may just need further optimization. Electro Ramp is not working anymore. Largely, Electro Ramp's win rates have gone down, and it is not as popular anymore. And then lastly, Cerebro 3. And I think what happened is a lot of people wanted to try out Cerebro 3 with Invisible Woman going from 2-2 to 2-3. And there's a couple versions of the Cerebro 3 deck. I think that a skilled player may be able to play this, but it looks highly inconsistent. And all of the C3 deck builds that I saw had negative cube rates and negative win rates. And for me, I'm going to be avoiding playing C3. Also, I don't have the patience for Cerebro decks. My good, I got to give props to the Cerebro players for not only battling their opponents, but battling the locations. And this just seems to be extremely hard right now when high evolutionaries function is to put negative effects. A lot of the cards in the high evolutionary deck, I just think right now is not the time for Cerebro decks with the popularity of high evolutionary, because high evolutionary is everywhere. Let me know what you think in the comment section. What is working for you? Anything you think that I missed? And as always, thanks for watching and keep on gaming. Bye for now.